Bhakti Gauranitai Ki Jai. Namaste Saraswati Devi. Hare Krishna. Anu, how are you? Haribo. Okay, you're still corona free. Yeah.
I was wondering if, I just realized I have to join this online class at 3 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Is it possible to come like at 11:30 or 12 or something?
Sure.
They do the RT at 12?
They do the RT at 12, yes. Yeah, you can come there. No problem.
So maybe, what if I plan on meeting you at 11:30 at the temple then?
Okay. Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Bye.
Bye. Yeah. What? Yeah. But not too loud. Okay. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutali Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamini Namaste Saraswati Devaya Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Praskatya Desatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Srimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Haribo. So now we're continuing, and I received homework from Shrivani and Samuk, and also Shritan and Agastya, and probably a few others. 1 second, I just want to double check here. Prabhalika and Krishna and Arisha and Shritan. Okay, So, let's start with Pravalika because I wanted to read her homework yesterday. And I didn't. So, let me just see here. Okay, so Pravalika. So, let me read her homework for yesterday first because there was something there I wanted to talk about. Oh. What is this? Okay, anyway, I'll read her homework today. Okay, so Pravalika writes, compare the Vedic monarchy system to the representative democratic American government. And parentheses, Srimad Bhagvatam 1:16.2 and 3. And she says, I found my answers from Srila Prabhupada's morning walk on December 30th, 1973. Okay, good. In the Vedic times, there were examples of taking over kingship by Brahmanas to get rid of a bad king. For example, Krishna killing King Kamsa, or Maharaj Yudhisthira and Arjuna in the Battle of Kurukshetra killing the old political regime that were demonic, that possessed demonic consciousness. In politics, unless there is violence, one cannot. Well, it says one cannot take. It means one cannot succeed. Okay, you have to correct that, Pravalika. Simply by sweet words, it is not possible. In the beginning of creation, the fight between demigods and demons was always there. In European history, without revolution, there were no changes in the order of things. Even the Russian Revolution was there, as well as the French Revolution, also in England, Cromwell Revolution, and of course the Revolutionary War in America, in USA. In the modern democratic government, the rule in the modern democratic government, you say the rules are chosen by the people of the country. Okay, I'm not sure about that. If the people become Krishna conscious, naturally the leader will become Krishna conscious and there will be no question of violence. If the people are demons, the president cannot do anything. Therefore, people's mentality and consciousness should be changed by Krishna consciousness movement. When they become God conscious or Krishna conscious, they will choose a Krishna conscious president. Formerly, people used to choose a king as the final authority, but at the present moment, that is not accepted. But people must accept it. Now it is people's government. Unless people are Krishna conscious, you cannot have a good government. Okay. Basically, what Pravalika is saying is that if enough people, let's say, revolt or complain, then, in a sense, the government is forced to make a change. That's true in many instances, not always true. Like, for example, in Venezuela, where they have so-called democratic government, the people chose a different president, but the dictator, Maduro, has insisted on staying in power and refusing to acknowledge the legally elected president. So the will of the people is not always followed, especially in dictatorships. And Iran also, many times people have protested and even revolted, but they've been crushed by the military. And the mullahs have always stayed in power. So you have two examples there. One is Venezuela, one is Iran. And in China also, people have revolted in a sense, like in Hong Kong. But the Chinese army has crushed the resurrection, or the insurrection. So sometimes the will of the people is not done, even though they protest and they revolt and so forth. Even if they vote, sometimes a president or leader out, they can be crushed by the military. Okay, so what is her point? Her point is, when people become God conscious or Krishna conscious, they will choose a Krishna conscious president. Okay, so the original homework was compare the Vedic monarchy system to the representative democratic American government. Well, you have done that in a sense, but you have to go much deeper into the question, do more research. This is somewhat of a hard homework question because it requires a lot of in-depth, I would say, research. But you've answered it to a certain degree. Then secondly, it says, compare direct democracy to representative democracy. Direct democracy, or pure democracy, is a form of democracy in which people decide on policy initiatives directly. Representative democracy, also known as indirect democracy or representative government, is a type of democracy founded on the principle of elected officials representing a group of people. In a representative democracy, people vote for representatives who then enact initiatives. In a direct democracy, people decide on policies without any speaker or without any representative. They are similar because both are ways where people's ideas are sought to be heard. Okay, so the main thing is, in a representative democracy, people vote to have a representative. And just like you have members of the House of Representatives, and they're voted in. And once they're voted in, they make policy decisions. Do they always represent the majority opinion in their constituency or in their area of responsibility? No, not always. Sometimes they go against what the people want. Then they have to face an election every 2 years in the House of Representatives. So they can be changed very rapidly if they don't, let's say, represent the majority of the people in their area of responsibility. Then you have the second part of the Congress, which is the House, which is the Senate, where they're elected in every 6 years. So the House of Representatives has certain responsibilities, and then the Senate has other responsibilities. But the Senate is supposed to be, let's say, more stable in its makeup. So therefore, they have like the House of Representatives has responsibility over funding the government. The Senate has responsibility of appointing or deciding who's going to become a judge, who is. So they have divided responsibilities. So to answer this question, you would have to also go into the structure of the House of Representatives and what their responsibilities are, and then Senate, what their responsibilities are, why the senators have a longer period of functioning than the House of Representatives, and also the other two parts of the government. So that one is the legislative part of the government. They make laws, right? And secondly, you have the executive branch, which executes the laws, that puts them into practice and tries to maintain them. And also the executive branch has power over the military and so forth. And then you have the judicial branch of the government. So you have it's three branches of the government in the United States: congressional, executive, and the judicial. And there are checks and balances that limit the powers that all three have. And then there are certain things called the amendments to the there's the Constitution of the United States, and then there's the amendments to the Constitution, which further limit the powers of the different branches and explains, what they can do, what they can't do. So, therefore, the President of the United States, although he's considered the most powerful man in the world, actually, he's not completely in command, because he has limited powers, and he has to rely on the cooperation or non-cooperation of the Congress, and then he's also limited by the judicial third part, which sometimes can override him. He may make certain policy decisions, and they can be challenged, and then the Supreme Court can decide whether it's legal or not legal. So you see, it's a little more complicated, and it requires thinking and learning more about, what are the different branches of the government, how they function, how they interrelate. So I would say this is not necessary to be an expert in this, but it's interesting to know about it and compare it to the Rajarsi system of government as in Vedic tradition. So in the Vedic tradition, a king is appointed by saintly persons. What does that mean, saintly persons? People are actually following the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. So let's take a look in the first canto, where I can give you some hints of how to understand more clearly the Vedic system of government. Okay, 1 second. So if we look in Srimad Bhagvatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, okay, so in the first canto, Chapter 17, verse number 8, it says, in the purport, the protection of the lives of both the human beings and the animals is the first and foremost duty of a government. A government must not discriminate in such principles. It is simply horrible for a pure-hearted soul to see organized animal killing by the state in this age of Kali. Maharaj Parikshit was lamenting for the tears in the eyes of the bull, and he was astonished to see such an unprecedented thing in his good kingdom. Men and animals were equally protected as far as life was concerned. That is the way of God's kingdom. So then, the next verse, 117, verse number 9. Protection of bulls and cows and other animals can be possible only when there is a state ruled by an executive head like Maharaj Parikshit. Maharaj Parikshit addressed the cow as mother, for he is a cultured, twice-born Kshatriya king. Surabhi is the name of the cows which exist in the spiritual planets and are especially reared by Lord Shri Krishna himself. As men are made after the form and features of the Supreme Lord, so also the cows are made after the form and features of the Surabhi cows in the spiritual kingdom. In the material world, the human society gives all protection to the human being, but there's no law to protect the descendants of Surabhi who can give all protection to men by supplying the miracle food, milk. But Maharaj Parikshit and the Pandavas were fully conscious of the importance of the cow and bull, and they were prepared to punish the cow killer with all chastisement, including death. There has sometimes been agitation for the protection of the cow, but for want of pious executive heads and suitable laws, the cow and the bull are not given protection. The human society should recognize the importance of the cow and the bull, and thus give all protection to these important animals, following in the footsteps of Maharaj Parikshit. For protecting the cows and Brahminical culture, the Lord, who is very kind to the cow and the Brahmanas, Go Brahmana Hitaya, will be pleased with us and will bestow upon us real peace. Wow. So here we see one thing that's central to the Rajarsis, or the proper management of a kingdom. So it says that the protection of the lives of both the human beings and the animals is the first and foremost duty of a government. A government must not discriminate in these principles. It is simply horrible for a pure-hearted soul to see organized animal killing by the state in this age of Kali. So, if someone says Black Lives Matter, yes, but in a more significant sense, all lives matter. And we can't just take one group and ignore another group. So, and we can't just take human beings and ignore animals, and especially the most important animals like the cow and the bull. So we see this question of Vedic government is a little more complicated than you think, and therefore you have to look into it. It's important to understand what is the model of good government, and this is what we should be aiming for in Krishna consciousness. So if you look in the first canto, in the general index, you look up government, and then it has a whole bunch of references. Like, for example, the first principle of government is to protect the living entities, including animals. And so then again, 1062, one second. There's a lot of information in here about good government. So I'm going to give you some references. So it also says, okay, so on first canto, chapter 19, verse number 4, 119.4. Real happiness is, so Prabhupada writes, real happiness is achieved by spiritual existence, or by the cessation of the repetition of birth and death. One can stop the repetition of birth and death only by going back to Godhead. In the material world, even by attaining the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, one cannot get rid of the conditions of repeated birth and death. But still, we do not accept the path of attaining perfection. The path of perfection frees one from all material attachments, and thus one becomes fit to enter into the spiritual kingdom. Therefore, those who are materially poverty-stricken are better candidates than those who are materially prosperous. You see, here it is, right here. It's a very important point. Maharaj Parikshit was a great devotee of the Lord and a bona fide candidate for entering into the kingdom of God. But even though he was so, his material assets as the emperor of the world were setbacks to perfect attainment of his rightful status as one of the associates of the Lord in the spiritual sky. As a devotee of the Lord, he could understand that the cursing of the Brahmana boy, although unwise, was a blessing upon him, being the cause of detachment from worldly affairs, both political and social. Samika Muni also, after regretting the incident, conveyed the news to the king as a matter of duty so that the king would be able to prepare himself to go back to Godhead. Samika Muni sent news to the king that the foolish Shringi, his son, although a powerful Brahmana boy, unfortunately had misused his spiritual power by cursing the king unwarrantedly. The incident of the king's garlanding the Muni was not sufficient cause for being cursed to death, but since there was no way to retract the curse, the king was informed to prepare for death within a week. Both Samika Muni and the king were self-realized souls. Samika Muni was a mystic, and Maharaj Parikshit was a devotee. Therefore, there was no difference between them in self-realization. Neither of them was afraid of meeting death. Maharaj Parikshit could have gone to the Muni to beg his pardon, but the news of imminent death was conveyed to the king with so much regret by the Muni that the king did not want to shame the Muni further by his presence there. He decided to prepare himself for his imminent death and find a way out to go back to Godhead. Now, here's where the important point comes. The life of a human being is a chance to prepare oneself to go back to Godhead, or to get rid of the material existence, the repetition of birth and death. Thus, in the system of Varnasrama-Dharma, every man and woman is trained for this purpose. In other words, the system of Varnasrama-Dharma is known as Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal occupation. The system of Varnasrama-Dharma prepares a man for going back to Godhead, and thus a householder is ordered to go to the forest as vanaprastha to acquire complete knowledge, and then to take sannyasa prior to his inevitable death. Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate to get a 7-day notice to meet his inevitable death, but for the common man there's no definite notice, although death is inevitable for all. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. They spoil their lives in animal propensities to eat, drink, be merry, and enjoy. Such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in the age of Kali because of a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must enjoy revenue to advance these 3 items and thus educate the populace to prepare for death. The state which does so is the real welfare state. The state of India should better follow the example of Maharaj Parikshit, the ideal executive head, than to imitate other materialistic states which have no idea of the kingdom of God, the ultimate goal of human life. Deterioration of the ideals of Indian civilization has brought about the deterioration of civic life not only in India but also abroad. So here we see 3 important points that were very seriously protected in Vedic Rajarsi government, saintly king government. That is, and such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in the age of Kali because of a sinful desire to 1. Condemn Brahminical culture, 2. God consciousness, and 3. Cow protection, for which the state is responsible. So the state must protect Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection. Now it's very interesting. If you look in the news in the last 2-3 days, you'll see that the people protesting now, or at least one part of them, the leader of Black Lives Matter movement, has made a statement saying that all statues and all symbols of white Jesus should be destroyed also, along with all statues of Confederate Civil War so-called heroes, and all statues of Union leaders such as Ulysses Grant, and all statues of white people, basically, should be destroyed in the United States. And all names of Confederate based monuments or names of sports teams or colleges, all these things should be destroyed. So, but what's noteworthy is he said that all statues and all symbols of white Jesus should be destroyed. So, you can see how what's a symbol of a demoniac government is being advocated by some people today in a very powerful way. And this whole process of destroying God consciousness, Brahminical culture, and cow protection. Already cow protection has been completely rejected by modern democratic government. And Brahminical culture, even in India, Brahminical culture in certain states of India is seriously been damaged, such as Kerala and other places where there are communist governments in the states of India, and Bengal also to a certain degree, and Kerala and maybe some others. So these are the three things that are indicative of bad government in modern times. That's condemning the sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must employ revenue to advance these three items, and thus educate the populace to prepare for death. The state which does so is the real welfare state. So, if you read the Constitution of the United States, like for example, one second. So in the it says, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a well-known phrase in the United States Declaration of Independence. The phrase gives three examples of the unalienable rights which the Declaration says have been given to all humans by the Creator, by God, which governments are created to protect. So the framers of the Declaration of Independence, who later on went on to make the Constitution of the United States, had this phrase. It says, the United States Declaration of Independence was drafted by Thomas Jefferson and then edited by a committee of 5, which consisted of Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Roger Livingston. It was then further edited and adopted by the Committee of the Whole of the Second Continental Congress on July 4th, 1976. The second paragraph of the first article in the Declaration of Independence contains the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson's original rough draft is on exhibit in the Library of Congress. This version was used by Julian Boyd to create a transcript of Jefferson's draft, which reads, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The Committee of Five edited Jefferson's draft. Their version survived further edits by the whole Congress intact and reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Okay. Is this statement Krishna conscious? So that this is your homework. And this is going to require some research. And you are doing research to do your homework now, so that's very good. Here's a statement that's in the Declaration of Independence. It was worked and revised and agreed upon and then published. And it says, it's the second paragraph of the first article in the Declaration of Independence, where this phrase appears. So it says, and finally, it was edited and approved by the whole Congress in 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, self-evident, what does that mean? That means that you cannot deny it. That's what it means. Like, you cannot deny that every child has a father and mother. So that's an a priori, self-evident truth. So look up the words a priori, A, and then next word, priori. And it means self-evident. You cannot argue against it. Now the question is this actually a self-evident truth? They're claiming in the Declaration of Independence that it is. Notice it says Declaration of Independence. So, let me read it. So the final phrase, the final wording was, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. So unalienable means you cannot deny these rights to people. In other words, the government cannot deny these rights to people. What are they? That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, is this true from the Krishna conscious point of view? This is something you're going to have to think about and research and see if in Krishna conscious we agree with this or not. Okay, let me give you some hints. Well, an unalienable right. First of all, it says that all men are created equal. Is that true? Well, physically it's not true. And in terms of karma, it's not true. However, and this is where it becomes interesting, in terms of receiving the mercy of God, it is true. Even though from the point of view of karma, it's not true. From the point of view of physical capability, it's not true. A person born blind is not equal to a person who has eyes, right? Just like Dhritarashtra, he was born blind, and he was blind by material attachment. So, when is it true that all persons are equal? It's only true when they surrender to Krishna. It's not true if they don't surrender to Krishna. Okay, so now I'm giving you some hints now, and this becomes very interesting because this whole country is based on this self-evident truth by the framers of the Declaration of Independence and later on the Constitution of the United States. And if this statement is not really true in all circumstances, then we have a problem. It may be true if people surrender to Krishna. So everyone has the same potential if they surrender to Krishna. Why? Because certain things happen when you surrender. Point one, when you surrender to Krishna, your previous karma is put on hold or eradicated. So there's different levels of karmic reaction, as we know. There is the subtle tendency to be attracted to sense gratification. Then there is acts of sin. Then there are two phases that come, two things that happen. There's the parabdha and aparabdha. There's the unseen reactions, and then there are the seen reactions of sins. So the unseen subtle reactions have different stages. One is dormant stage. 2 is the budding stage. And 3 is the mature stage. So in the unseen state, the dormant state, we don't see the reactions, although they are present. Reactions to what? Sinful activities that one committed. And before sinful activities, we were born with the tendency to be attracted to sinful activities as coming from a previous life. So usually those tendencies are awakened at puberty, when a child, a boy or girl, reaches 11, 12, 13 years old. Their desires from previous life are awakened. Okay, they're unfulfilled desires and their tendencies to sin. Okay, so then there's the dormant stage of sinful reaction. Then there's the budding stage, where just in spring you see the buds appear on trees, and it develops into flowers, and then the flowers can develop into fruits. So the budding stage is when you start having bad dreams, and then strong material desires, and then attraction to sinful activity, and then thinking, feeling, and willing, you eventually perform sinful acts, and then the reactions start, and in the budding stage, it's like very strong attraction to sinful activities and sense gratification, and then one performs those acts, and then the reactions start. So in the budding stage, the reactions are bad dreams, irresistible material desires, and then it develops into full-blown results, such as financial problems, legal problems, becoming ugly, and then also stupid, and so forth. And then you have also what's called congenital problems. You're born crippled, or you're born blind, or you're born deaf, or you're born with a defective heart, or something like that. So, and then after that, when you have to suffer the results, the mature fruits of sinful activity, eventually you die. But what remains is the tendency to be attracted to sinful acts, and that's very subtle, and it'll take you into the next life. Okay? So, are all men created equal? Not in the sense of physical capability or mental capability at birth. And not in the sense of, let's say, access to education at birth. It can be born in a very poor family, or it can be born in a very good family. So they're not exactly equal in every respect. But if someone surrenders to Krishna, the most significant thing is their karma is put on hold or eradicated completely, and they're given a chance to be Krishna conscious, to be trained in Krishna consciousness, regardless of even congenital, let's say, diseases or congenital defects that they may be born with. So we studied at one point Helen Keller. She was born blind and deaf, but she became a great author and Christian writer. She was able to overcome those tremendous, what you would call, handicaps because of her spirituality. Okay, so now all men are created equal. Well, if you study what it means, how it's interpreted, and by legal scholars, they would say that everyone should be given an education, free education. Everyone should be able to take books out of a library for free. Everyone has a right to be elected to office in the government, regardless of what race they are, or what level of intelligence they have, etc. And so they try and explain different ways that people are equal, but the fact is, physically and emotionally and mentally, they're not all equal, and because they have different karmas at birth from previous life. And that karma gives them the tendency to be sinful. And if the government supports sinful activity, then that's an incentive for them to be sinful. Like, you can legally smoke marijuana now. You can legally buy alcohol. You can legally have an abortion. You can legally do... So if the government is supporting these sinful activities, then it's misleading the people according to Vedic tradition and according to Vedic governance, you see. So then it says life. Well, yeah, the purpose of government is to protect life, but they protect, but nowadays they permit abortion. So they're not actually protecting life, and they also make legal in certain states in the United States the right to commit suicide. So they're not actually protecting life completely. And then the example of the policeman that choked, had a chokehold on George Floyd, or other examples of people who are dying while they're in custody due to police brutality. They're not actually protecting people, you see. So the unalienable right of life, of as it says, life, liberty. First of all men are created equal, and they have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, liberty, is everyone actually free? No one is free of the laws of karma. You only become free if you surrender to Krishna. And that also is limited if you continue to sin after surrendering to Krishna, you see. And then the pursuit of happiness, well, what does that mean? If it's the pursuit of material happiness, then that is not. That means the government, if they promote material happiness only, like economic development and so forth, that is misleading the people. Real happiness is attained when you no longer have a material body, but you have a spiritual body. So the way to get that spiritual body, I mean, we have a spiritual body, but it's covered now. The way to attain that eternal life and eternal spiritual body, that should be protected and promoted by the government. That's according to what's being said here in the purport of 119.4. It says, the life of a human being is a chance to prepare oneself to go back to Godhead, or to get rid of the material existence, the repetition of birth and death. So, is the government inspiring people to go in this direction? No, they're inspiring people to live to the fullest now, eat, sleep, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow we shall die. So there's no education or preparation for death. It's all, don't think about death, just enjoy life right now, you see. So the whole idea here is that the government today, even from the very beginning, where you have the Declaration of Independence, is there such a thing as independence? Let's ask that question. Okay, maybe you can get so-called independence from England, but that doesn't mean you're independent, because you're still dependent on being controlled by the modes of material nature, by time, by karma, etc. So this whole thing is misleading. This whole Declaration of Independence, if it's taken in a material sense, is misleading. And by the way, is there a mention of God in the Declaration of Independence? Is there a mention of God? Yes, well, originally there was. Let's see here. There is a mention. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, so that means God, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, did Krishna give the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all living entities? This is what you have to research and see if this is true or not. Yeah, I mean, you have a period of life that goes along with this material body. It's predetermined. That's a fact. And it is a fact that one of the roles of government is to protect the life of human beings, as well as animals, as well as all life, trees, etc., plants. You know. And liberty, well, the freedom to be Krishna conscious, not the freedom to sin. Right? So, therefore, in America you have what's called a sin tax. That is, they permit sins as long as you pay taxes. So, the sin tax is all the government taxes on cigarettes, on marijuana, and things like there are taxes on gambling. So is the government actually promoting sinful activity by saying, okay, you can sin as long as you pay this tax? Yes, that's the point. So is the government actually protecting the people? No, they're not. They're letting them get away, letting them think that, abortions and smoking marijuana and cigarettes and eating meat and so forth, all these things are okay as long as you pay some tax. So So you see, now we can analyze this Declaration of Independence. Are we actually independent? Well, we're not exactly independent as long as the government is permitting us to commit sinful activities and not have, and as long as you pay a tax, and in that way, they're not doing their duty of protecting the citizens. And their goal is you can pursue a life of freedom from, even though they're promoting sinful activities, and the pursuit of happiness, meaning material happiness, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So, therefore, if that is the understanding of the Declaration of Independence, then it's wrong. It's not representative of the Creator. And the Creator, they're misrepresenting the Creator, or God, by this Declaration of Independence, or at least this part of it. So it says here, a number of possible sources or inspirations for Jefferson's use of the phrase in the Declaration of Independence have been identified, although scholars debate the extent to which any of them actually influenced Jefferson. The greatest disagreement comes between those who suggest the phrase was drawn from John Locke and those who identify some other source. So you see, Jefferson got this idea of using this phrase from philosophers. Some of them were Christian, and some of them may not have been Christian. They're not exactly sure. So, for example, John Locke, he said in an essay called Essay Concerning Human Understanding that the highest perfection of intellectual nature lies in a careful and constant pursuit of true and solid happiness. Now, can we agree with that statement by John Locke? You see, did Jefferson derive these phrases that are integral to the Declaration of Independence from a person like John Locke, who's a materialistic philosopher, or did they rely on the Bible? See, so people say, well, John Locke is a Christian philosopher, but if he's misrepresenting God, then he's not really a Christian philosopher. See, so you see, they're deriving these ideas from philosophers who are usually speculators. So let's say you were a member of the original committee to draw up the Declaration of Independence. Would you write what Jefferson and the other members of the committee proposed, or would you write something different? How would you write the Declaration of Independence? Would you say that, as was voted on by the original Congress, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Would you write that? So you decide. You do some research, and here I gave you one very good reference, and there are others. Another hint is you look up Maharaj, Prithu Maharaj. It's in the later part of the Bhagavatam. You just type his name in, and it'll show you what part of the Bhagavatam it's discussing him. He was an ideal king. So was Lord Ramachandra. So was Yudhisthira. With these statements in the Declaration of Independence, in the Congress, and then in the Constitution of the United States, would they be guiding principles for Lord Ramachandra, for Prithu Maharaj, and for Yudhisthira Maharaj, who were ideal kings? See, now we're getting into a very interesting area of thought and philosophy and spiritual consciousness. So, Prabhupada says in this purport to 110.4, it says, the system of Varnasrama-Dharma prepares a man for going back to Godhead. What is Varnasrama-Dharma? It is the lower half of Swadharma, or one's duties in life, right? So it divides society into four, designations: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, and gives them a system of working together cooperatively for what? Preparing for engaging in what's called Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal occupation. What is that eternal occupation? It is devotional service to Lord Krishna. The system of Varnasrama-Dharma prepares a man for going back to Godhead. This is the organization of society in Vedic times. It prepares a person to go back to Godhead, not to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the material world. See, is there any mention of spiritual world in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States? No, there isn't. There is some mention of God, but there's no mention of the spiritual world. It's only about life in this world, right? But life in this world that ignores spiritual culture is a condemnation, is a curse on people to stay in the cycle of birth and death. It's a violation of what is the actual purpose of human life. The actual purpose is to go back to Godhead. It's not to stay in the material world. So you see, right from the beginning of the United States, the first statements in the Declaration of Independence sound good, but are misleading. Now, you decide. That's my first take on this. You decide. You do some research. So it says here, the system of Varnasrama-Dharma prepares a man for going back to Godhead, and thus a householder is ordered to go to the forest as a vanaprastha to acquire complete knowledge. So when you go to a householder, means husband and wife together. And in the third stage of life, of vanaprastha, they learn to detach themselves from their home, and their kids are already grown and married and are no longer need to be maintained by the parents. So they're free now to pursue spiritual life together. So this is the third phase of life. And then the fourth phase, husband takes sannyas and wife goes either to a holy place to continue to practice Krishna consciousness, or she lives under the protection of her own adult children and continues to practice Krishna consciousness. And the husband completely puts himself at the mercy of Krishna by becoming an itinerant sannyasi and traveling, not staying in one place for more than, technically not more than 3 days, and preaching Krishna consciousness, being completely dependent on Krishna, not having any means of maintenance other than what Krishna gives him to, let's say, preach. Okay, so it says here that the householder is ordered to go to the forest as vanaprastha. Notice it says ordered. To acquire complete knowledge and then to take sannyasa prior to his inevitable death. Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate. So the wife is also sannyasi. She doesn't travel around. She stays in a holy place or under the protection of her eldest son, and she practices Krishna consciousness the same way her husband is practicing Krishna consciousness. But she doesn't move around because that would it's not favorable for women to move around by themselves. They should always be protected. So, and then to acquire, as a vanaprastha, they acquire complete knowledge and then take sannyasa prior to inevitable death. Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate to get a 7-day notice to meet his inevitable death. But for the common man, there's no definite notice, although death is inevitable for all. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. Now, this is exactly what's happening today to most people. And it doesn't, even the Indian people who should know all these things, they also ignore it. See? But if you look at Prabhupada, he didn't ignore it. He went through these 4 stages of life: brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas. See? So this is not being protected, this is not being promoted by modern democratic governments. And because of that, there's a bottleneck. People are not going back to Godhead. So therefore, the human population is increasing because actually, if people live properly, at the end of life, they go back to Godhead. But you'll see that there are more crows and more human beings because there's a bottleneck. They're not going back to Godhead. They're taking birth again over and over in different species and suffering. So Prabhupada says, but for the common man there's no definite notice, although death is inevitable for all. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. They spoil their lives in animal propensities to eat, drink, be merry, and enjoy. Such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in the age of Kali because of a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must employ revenue to advance these 3 items and thus educate the populace to prepare for death. The state which does so is the real welfare state. The state of India should better follow the example of Maharaj Parikshit, the ideal executive head, than to imitate other materialistic states which have no idea of the kingdom of God, the ultimate goal of human life. Deterioration of the ideals of Indian civilization has brought about the deterioration of civic life, not only in India, but abroad also. So, now you have your homework for next week. And it's a very interesting subject. And we're going to the very basis of the entire American dream, the American experiment, the American government and governance. And back to the formative document, the Declaration of Independence. Actually, they should have made a declaration of dependence on the mercy of God. That should have been their document. Not the Declaration of Independence, but the Declaration of dependence on the mercy of God. How do we know that? Well, we go back to First Canto, Chapter 13. And verse number okay, so Prabhupada says, First Canto, Chapter 13, Text 27, which is what we read today, this morning. By the way, let me tell you something also. Every day I give a lecture on the Srimad Bhagvatam, and we're in the first canto now, but we're going to go through all the cantos, hopefully, or at least many of them. So these lectures are online, and it's a systematic study of Srimad Bhagvatam. So you should also take advantage of it. And Daniel, where do they look? To YouTube, is ISKCON's YouTube or Facebook channel. has these lectures. There's hundreds of them. And it's systematic, going through Canto 1, Chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, now we're up to Chapter 13. We're going verse by verse. So today we read something that should be the Declaration of Independence on the Mercy of God. And it says, the idea that the renounced order of life, after a frustrated life of sentiment in the material world, may be the stepping stone on the path of self-realization. But real perfection of the path of liberation is attained when one is practiced to depend fully on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who lives in everyone's heart as Paramatma. Okay? So we should have the declaration of not independence, but the declaration of liberation. And what is the declaration of liberation? The real perfection of the path of liberation is attained when one is practiced to depend fully on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who lives in everyone's heart as Paramatma. There it is. The declaration of not independence, but a declaration of liberation. And in that, it explains the real perfection of the path of liberation is attained when one is practiced to depend fully on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so these are some ideas that you can use to understand the difference between the modern democratic so-called governments and the Vedic Rajarsi system of saintly king and monarchy based on saintly principles. So that's your homework for next week. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, you can ask them now. Hare Krishna. Anything coming, Daniel? Okay. Okay, no questions. Then we'll stop. You have your homework. And thank you very much. Hare Krishna.